Australia leads the world in the extent of gambling harm experienced by problem gamblers. In a recent survey, we found that Australians have lost over $25 billion a year on gambling. 60% of gambling losses are experienced by playing pokies, and most of those losses are sustained by people with gambling problems who can't afford to lose that. My name's Zoe Falster. I'm the Principal Psychologist at St Vincent's Health Network. Gambling addiction, it's often also called gambling disorder or problem gambling. It's a cluster of behaviours around gambling that tend to persist for a significant amount of time. To meet formal criteria, you need to meet 4 of the following criteria, and that includes a person feeling that they need to keep on going back to win back losses, feeling that you need to gamble when you're feeling low or depressed to escape negative mood states, a feeling that you need to gamble with more and more money to get that same feeling, that same rush when you gamble, inability to stop gambling even when you want to, feelings of restlessness or irritability when you're trying to cut back and you can't. Some of the characteristics of problem gambling also include trying to cover up your gambling behaviour, for example by lying or deceiving your family or friends around it. It can also be characterised by needing to depend on other people to pay back money for your losses or cover debts, for example. Gambling is really common in Australian culture. Around 50% of the population gamble regularly, but only 1% of the overall population will go on to become problem gamblers or have problems with gambling. Gambling disorder can happen to anyone. There's a bit of a myth out there that a certain kind of person with an addictive personality might be more susceptible to gambling, but we know that it can happen to anybody. There are certain individual traits that do make it more likely. It is more prevalent in people who have impulse control issues, so populations with executive dysfunction or ADHD might be more at risk of developing gambling disorder. We also know that it's more common in people who have a background history of stress or mental illness such as depression. Gambling addiction is a little bit different to other alcohol or substance use addictions in that there's often no overt sign that someone is intoxicated or high. The signs can be a little bit more subtle. For the person themselves, they might often notice increased preoccupation with gambling, feeling that they need to gamble rather than want to gamble, and feeling that when they gamble, they're always gambling more money than they planned to or staying for longer than they wanted to. For the people who live with a person with gambling disorder, it can be a very invisible condition. They may not realise that the person has a gambling disorder until the issues have become really impactful. So some of the things that a family member or a friend might notice is a person experiencing mood swings, a person becoming quite secretive with where they're spending their time, becoming quite secretive with their phone use or their financial situation. It often comes as a huge shock to friends and family members when they discover the extent of their loved one's gambling. There's also impacts on a person's occupational functioning. It might affect their performance at work and they may even lose jobs because of the preoccupation and time spent gambling. There's also often legal ramifications from gambling as well if a person has resorted to stealing or defrauding in order to obtain funds for gambling. The rate of suicidal ideation in the gambling population is also significantly higher than the general population. Around 40 to 60% of people with problems gambling will report suicidal ideation, and we also estimate that around 1 in 5 suicide attempts is related to gambling harm. So seeking help for gambling disorder can be a really challenging and hard thing to do. It certainly requires a person to be honest with themselves that they've reached that point that they are struggling to deal with this themselves. It is really important to reach out for help, and there are great services around that have resources and support for you. So here at St Vincent's we have a great team of clinical psychologists who offer specialised treatments for gambling addiction. The approach that we generally use is called cognitive behaviour therapy, and essentially it's an approach that helps a person who's having problems with gambling to identify what their triggers for gambling are, to understand where the urges come from, to start to address some of the belief structures that can exist that perpetuate gambling, and then to identify more helpful coping behaviours.